Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Monday afternoon webinar series from Corwin, your no-cost platform for superior professional learning. My name is Jeff Hahn, and I'm facilitating today's webinar. I am joined by Charlene Maher, Executive Marketing Manager from Corwin. Today's presentation is Growth Coaching as a Vehicle for Transforming School Culture, presented by John Campbell and Christian van Nieuwerburgh. John Campbell is Executive Director of Growth Coaching International, an Australian-based consulting organization that provides coaching and coaching services to school leaders and teachers across Australia and in the UK, the Middle East, and the Asia-Pacific region. Professor Christian van Nieuwerburgh is a well-respected executive coach, internationally recognized academic, and sought-after consultant. He is an executive coach and works at the University of East London, one of the world's leading centers for the postgraduate study of coaching. Together, they are the authors of the new book, The Leader's Guide to Coaching in Schools, Creating Conditions for Effective Learning, published by Corwin. Now, I would like to turn over the meeting to today's presenters.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christian. I'm delighted to be introducing this session. And so it'll be John and myself running this webinar. It's a great pleasure for us to be talking to educators and coaches all over the world. Both John and I started our profession as teachers, and it's amazing that many years later, we're still committed to education, and particularly our focus is on the application of coaching in educational settings. And we've dedicated our professional lives to this endeavor. And what we're trying to do is bring together theory, research, and practice, but primarily to have an impact in education, on educators, and on learners. So a great pleasure to be talking about the use of growth coaching as a vehicle for transforming school culture. I'm just going to hand over to my good colleague, John.
Yeah, thanks, Christian, and hello to everyone from me as well. Great to be joining you over this next 50 minutes or so. And what we thought we'd look at here is work through 4 areas that are related to the topics we've explored in the text. And in particular, we're looking to work through 4 topics here, exploring briefly schools as complex relational systems, having to think about the way that conversations really inform and drive the way those systems work, and then looking at how coaching concepts and skills can shape many of these conversations and give them real intent, purpose, focus, and lead to specific actions. So we'll then explore 2 different types of conversations of coaching conversations we think can really be part of every leader's repertoire. And we hope there'll be some useful takeaways that you can apply immediately in the way that you think about your work. So as we look at our first topic there, we're just giving some thought to the idea of these now coming up on screen, and those 4 areas we're going to be exploring. But just to kick off here, I'd like you to think about the images that occur in the next slide. Is a school more like this? And hopefully there's the clock, the cogs, the machine, the sprockets that you're seeing in that image. What does that suggest about your experience of working in a school context? Or is it more like this? And we have a kayaker navigating some fairly turbulent rapids there. As you reflect on your time in your school context, I'm wondering which image reflects more accurately your experience of school life and work. It may well be that you do think it runs pretty much like clockwork, but more often we're finding that organizational theorists and scholars and our own experience points to the fact that it's a more turbulent experience, a less predictable environment in which we work, with many more different competing priorities and stakeholder needs. Perhaps there's a combination of both of these things at times, but more often we're seeing people describe what happens in more organizations and schools particularly as complex relational systems where these kinds of things are evident, that we're seeing multiple influences that take place and are non-linear. It's not a simple cause-effect, step one, step two, and here's the outcome. There are lots of these interdependencies between various stakeholders and different groups. And of course, the players are active agents, intelligent active agents, responding to challenges, making decisions, and acting in various different ways. And typically, what emerges are sometimes unpredictable outcomes. So, as that image of what school life tends to emerge these days, we're then forced to think about what drives these organizations, and increasingly, what we're finding is that in the literature on leadership and organizational effectiveness, people highlighting the whole role of dialogue and conversation. That in fact, we're seeing this strong emphasis of these two related concepts emerging in the academic literature. And indeed, one key resource from Judith Glaser, who has written about conversational intelligence, has really highlighted the fact that everything happens through conversations. And we might describe, our schools as, webs of people getting things done by talking with each other. And so, if the conversation is a central part of organizational school effectiveness, we think that it's maybe helpful to think that if conversations are important, then coaching concepts and skills can be the super-octane fuel that really helps our schools work better and, in fact, can transform the culture of the way things work.
So when we think about the importance of conversations, obviously coaching takes a leading role in that. Back in 2012, when I started working for University of East London, one of the modules that I taught was called Coaching in Education. So what I wanted to do is just talk to you a little bit about definitions of coaching. In our experience, both John and I have seen excellent coaching practice going on, both in Australia, in the UK, the US, and now internationally. And the first step for me was to try to bring some definitional clarity to all this excellent work that was going on. So for a book called Coaching in Education, this is the definition that I proposed back in 2012. And I just want to highlight some of the key features of what we believe that coaching in education is. One of the key factors for us is that coaching is a one-to-one conversation. The reason that's important is that this kind of one-to-one conversation is one in which we can build trust and we can have powerful conversations where people can talk about the things they're most passionate about. In educational settings, we believe that coaching should be about the enhancement of learning and development. So that's a key part of coaching in education. But how we do it is really important too. And the how we do it is through increasing the self-awareness of the learner and a sense of personal responsibility. And the coach's role in all of this is facilitating the self-directed learning of the coachee through some of the skills that we'll talk about in a moment. Actually, one of the leading figures in coaching, Sir John Whitmore, who sadly passed away this year, says that coaching is about helping people to learn rather than teaching them. So for us, that's what's powerful about coaching in education. what we're doing as coaches is creating an environment in which people can learn, develop, and flourish.
And as we continue to think about the whole way that coaching works in education, we've noticed emerging in the way that people are talking about these conversations, different ways that are being described. And recently, in a paper from Associate Professor Anthony Grant at the University of Sydney, has written around this quality of conversations framework. And he's arguing that we have a continuum here that represents informal coaching conversations at one end on the far left at this point, and more formal coaching conversations at the far right-hand end. And we would totally agree with the concepts emerging here. And he then explores that there's more specific aspects of how this works, that right down the far left hand, we have more collaborative conversations. In the middle, we're moving towards quick exchanges that might happen in the corridor or car park or playground in a school. More informal coaching that takes place as well, that's not been set up maybe in the ways that formal coaching can be. And so there's this sort of variety of the ways in which coaching conversations can work. And this is what we're quite excited about, that in fact, we can bring a whole range of the coaching concepts and skills and tools into the way we lead. And that the notion of coaching having to always just be a formal expression or played out in a formal way, whilst that's still very helpful and important, isn't the only way it can make a difference. And in fact, we might find ourselves more frequently using a range of these informal conversations. And so when we talk about formal, we'd like just to have a go at thinking through these different ways in which this continuum can play out. Because we would see formal conversations in coaching typically take more time, might be half an hour or longer to go through a session. There will probably be some kind of written agreement or contract about the way that the different parties would be involved. There might be some documentation that just tracks how progress is going. Typically, they would go over several sessions, maybe even several months. And executive coaching and more formal coaching has tended to work in that way. Of course, we're aware that for people in schools, that sort of time commitment and that sort of expression of how coaching might play out is not always easy to deliver on, and not always necessarily the most appropriate response. So we're thinking that the whole formal coaching conversations we just described is one type of conversation, and helpful, important, and we think will always have a role. But it's these other informal conversations that can use coaching dimensions that we think are really a great way for leaders to think about how they lead.
Thank you, John. And as we were saying, both John and I have been working in this sector for a number of years now. And really this idea of the coaching approach has emerged from our experience of working in schools. And although I believe that in order to use a coaching approach, it's important for a person to learn to become a coach and to conduct formal coaching conversations, I think this really opens up the opportunity of using coaching across educational settings. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I just want to come back to what we were saying originally about, so we provided a definition of coaching in education. And now I just want to say a little bit about what we at Growth Coaching International believe are the three elements of effective coaching. This is based on a number of years of research, on theories around coaching, and on, we've learned both from the education sector, but also from the executive coaching sector. So we believe for effective coaching to take place, three key things are needed. Firstly, a set of coaching skills, which I'll talk about, but a conversational framework, which for us is the growth coaching model. And for me, one of the most important things is that coaching way of being. I'll say a little bit about each right now. So first of all, what's really key is for coaches to have these skills. You'll see them on the screen there. There's 8 what we believe are important skills for coaches to have. The great news for us as educators and educational leaders is that you have these skills already. Often the coach training that we do in schools, colleges, and universities is simply about sharpening these skills. And another thing to say about these skills is the ones such as developing trust and being present. These skills, in my view, are developed as we practice coaching. That's one of the really important reasons that we're very in favor of practicing coaching, using coaching frequently, because those skills develop over time as well. The second set and the second element is the growth conversational framework. And this is a conversational process. And we believe that following a process increases the chance during coaching conversations of change occurring. And I'll just say a little bit about this process to give you an idea of it. And we believe that this is the foundational for the formal coaching conversations, but also has application for the coaching approach too. When we use the growth process, the really important thing to remember is that we believe that underpinning any successful coaching or coaching approach is the relationship. There's plenty of research that supports that idea too. So once we believe that we have a strong professional relationship, the first thing we talk about in coaching is the goals. So what is it that the coachee would like to achieve? What is it that they're working towards? Once that's established, the next stage is to spend some time understanding the reality. In other words, what's happening at the moment. This also includes an opportunity for the coach to help the coachee think about the resources that they have. What strengths do they already have? What have they tried before? But most importantly, we're trying to identify the gap between where they'd like to be and where they are at the moment. The next stage, after we've identified that gap between where they'd like to be and where they are, is helping the coachee to generate a number of options. It's really important here that the coachee generates possible options towards where they'd like to be going. After the option stage, once they've looked through a number of options, then we help the coachee identify the option that they think is going to have the biggest impact or is going to be the easiest to implement. And then we move through to the will stage, when we're helping the coachee think through what will they do before the next conversation. Then in the growth model, we add a stage to talk about the tactics. What will people do practically in order to move closer to their goal? And finally, we consider habits. Which of those tactics might they turn into habits? What are the things that they're doing well that they'd like to integrate into their professional practice? So that's the growth process. I said that it was really important in the growth process to start with relationships and build on relationships. It's also important for us in the growth process to celebrate results when coachees start to experience those positive results. So that's the second element. First element was a set of skills. The second element is a conversational framework that's used to guide conversations. And the third one, and in our view right now, maybe the most important, is what we call the coaching way of being. You'll see we've tried to capture it by highlighting some of the aspects of what a coaching way of being is. But really what we're talking about here is who the coach is as a human being. Who are you as a coach? That's really at the heart of this. And for educators, this is a really critical aspect. One of the key things within the coaching way of being is the belief of the coach in the ability of the coachee to achieve what it is they've set out to achieve. So this, this belief in others, really at the heart of a coaching way of being, but I would argue also at the heart of being an outstanding educator and an outstanding educational leader. Now, all three of these elements should be apparent in both formal coaching conversations and in the coaching approach. And certainly, when I've noticed people coaching or using a coaching approach to leadership, the coaching way of being certainly comes through.
So when we talk about the formal forms of coaching, we see those elements as being a very helpful way to ensure that those formal coaching interactions deliver change and good outcomes and progress for those involved in working in that way. We go back to this continuum again, and we'll explore a little bit more about what we see as these informal coaching conversations. And we see that there's a range of them mentioned here. And we actually think it's useful to explore these under what we're calling coaching approach conversations. In fact, we would think that all of these outside how we've just defined and explored formal coaching could be grouped under coaching approach conversations. And one of the things we found useful to explore when we were working on the book was how this was a helpful way to bring some clarity to this whole field. There has been some confusion around definitions and so on, but we thought if we can tease it out in terms of, yes, formal coaching works, it has a place, it works in this kind of way, although that will be shaped a bit by context as well. But there's a whole raft of other kinds of conversations in which leaders are involved every day that could benefit by bringing various different elements of coaching, formal coaching, into those conversations. So we've defined the coaching approach in the book, and it's a key theme in the way that the book explores this area in this way. We're seeing a coaching approach is a way of applying the various transferable elements of coaching, of formal coaching, to other learning by talking contexts that would not necessarily typically be considered as coaching. So let's just unpack that a little, and we'd like to just explore what are those transferable elements that could apply, and then what kind of contexts are we talking about as well. So when we think about the various transferable elements, there's a whole range of them. We've articulated some of these key things about what makes formal coaching work. We think a number of these things that we list here can be part of a whole range of these other informal coaching approach conversations. But we can have a focus on helping to clarify an outcome, what's wanted, where the coachee or where the person coming with a challenge or issue may want to move towards. We think that's a helpful thing. That's part of what coaching's about, movement towards goals, a focus on what's wanted. That's one thing that can be brought into a whole range of other conversations. We think it's helpful to involve ourselves in identifying resources and building a sense of self-efficacy and agency as much as we can in our interactions with others. So identifying and exploring resources can be part of a whole range of different conversations, typically not thought of as coaching. We think in the way we deploy the skills of effective listening and questioning, particularly, I would probably add being present to that as well as one of the key skills that can be applied, again, in any human interaction, but certainly in coaching approach conversations. And in fact, we might say that the being present skill that we focused on and highlighted just earlier is maybe one of the more challenging ones in our current distracted environment in which we live. And to be effective in short interactions, that being present needs to be particularly finely tuned. There's a sense in which accountability is part of formal coaching, the sense of coming back and looking how progress is going. That's an element that can also be part of informal interactions as well, albeit in a much more formal, briefer way. we think the whole notion of generating options and exploring possibilities is certainly a helpful thing to be involved in, and the whole notion of how hope is built by encouraging pathways and thinking according to some of the theory in that field. So options being explored is another key transferable element of coaching. And of course, moving forward in small step actions, the solution-focused approach, which is important in the way we work, is emphasizes this, that we don't need to highlight long lists of to-dos, but really helping our coachee or our conversational partner to take small steps towards progress is a helpful way to go. We believe these are things that can be part of formal coaching. We think they can absolutely be part of these coaching approach interactions as well. So these are some of those kind of elements. But what are the contexts then in which we might see these coaching approach conversations work?
Thank you, John. So what we've done so far, and our intention is to be supportive of educators and educational professionals. So we've talked already, we've provided a definition of coaching in education. We've talked about the three key elements, and those are a set of skills, a process, and the coaching way of being. What we do in this new book is what we've just been talking about, we distinguish between the formal coaching conversations and what we call coaching approach, taking a coaching approach. And one of the other things that we've been reflecting on is trying to bring together all of the best practice that we see all over the world around the use of coaching in education. And anytime I've been, traveling around talking about coaching in education, people ask me, what does that mean, Christian? Does it mean you coach teachers? Is it really about leaders coaching others? Are you talking about students? And that's why John Campbell and I, along with our good colleague Jim Knight, we developed the global framework for coaching in education. And the global framework, what the intention of this was to identify in what contexts can coaching be used in schools, colleges, and universities. So in our model, there's 4 quadrants. The first quadrant I'll talk about, which is probably the most important quadrant, is the quadrant of student success and well-being. What we mean by that is that both formal coaching and a coaching approach can be used to enhance student success. The reason we've called it student success and well-being is that we recognize that we want coaching as an approach to support both of those things. Some examples there are, you could have coaches supporting students with examination performance. You could have students coaching one another, and you could have teachers using, let's say, a coaching approach in their classrooms. So one quadrant, which we believe all of the other quadrants support as well, is student success and well-being. The next quadrant is educational leadership. And what we're saying here is that coaching can be used to enhance the quality of leadership in our educational institutions. Some examples of this are maybe providing school leaders or administrators with executive coaching support. Other ideas would be to train educational leaders in coaching skills, and as we're suggesting today, for educational leaders to embrace a coaching approach across a broad range of their interactions. The third quadrant I'm going to mention is professional practice. This is really about enhancing the skills and the pedagogy of teachers and other professionals in our schools, colleges, and universities. In our work, we see that there's a lot of interest in this globally, and we're seeing great examples of teachers coaching one another, of teachers adopting a coaching approach in their interactions and of finding ways that coaching can support professional development in educational settings. The fourth quadrant, which is the one where currently there's probably the least research, is thinking about ways that coaching can be used to build better links and partnerships with the community of the educational institution. So in this way, the global framework, its intention is to be helpful to practitioners, to identify different areas where coaching can be used, but it's also driving the research agenda, where we can break the research down into these 4 areas. So the work that we've done in this new book, The Leader's Guide to Coaching in Schools, obviously falls under the educational leadership arena, and we're interested in how educational leaders can use formal coaching and coaching approaches in their work.
So when we do focus on that particular quadrant or portal, we can get even more specific on that. So when we start to think about what particular contexts in the educational leadership arena could we find a coaching approach useful? And we've written about these in various different parts of the book, but we think, for instance, typically in most organizations, schools included, performance reviews are not typically conducted in a coaching way, and we're not seen as coaching. We think there's an opportunity to recast these, to reframe these in a way that they can bring a number of the elements of what we've described as of formal coaching into play in this context. So that is one context that typically perhaps wouldn't be seen as a coaching environment. We think it can be made better by coaching concepts and tools that can apply here. Typically, interactions that happen in the corridor or in the playground or in the car park or in the queue waiting for buses or whatever it might be in a school environment. There are students who will engage us in different ways. We think there's opportunities in those short moments to bring some key aspects of a coaching approach that will make those interactions better, go somewhere, progress topics, and create some movement. Typically, though, we wouldn't have seen those as coaching opportunities. Parent interviews, again, another context where we have seen schools starting to reshape the way they conduct parent conferences to bring in some of the elements we've been talking about. So there is this notion of progress, of focusing on what's wanted, of building on resources, of developing some goals, of looking at small step actions. Again, not typically something we would have viewed as being coaching interactions, but we do believe there's an opportunity to bring some of these elements into those. Another one not listed here is just in the way that leaders might engage with their teams. There's a chapter in the book that addresses this, and our definition talks about coaching really primarily being a one-to-one interaction. So therefore, a one-to-many or a one-to-few in a team context is more challenging conversation. A group conversation with issues around trust that are different, with the whole complexity of that interaction is a qualitatively different interaction. But we think the coaching elements that we've described can make an impact there as well. And then just finally, and this is not necessarily exhaustive, but we'll probably all recognize the just a minute conversation, that knock on the door, knock on the area where we're working that says, have you got a minute? I'd like to run something past you. And there's probably not any of us involved here who haven't had that experience at some time. And again, typically, we would not necessarily have viewed that as a coaching conversation. We think, though, there's a lot can be achieved if we bring some of these elements we've been exploring, refine them, and become skilled at the way we use them. We can make a difference in a short time. And so what we'd like to look at here as we move to towards the latter part of this time together is a short clip that just gives an example of how a coaching approach conversation can work in this just a minute, if you like, context. So here we have Jason, who's working in his office. Knock on the door. Sandy comes in, and here we go with the video clip here. Now, you might just take a moment to look at this.
Come in.
Hi, Jason.
Hi, Sandy.
Have you got a moment? There's
Yeah.
something I would like to discuss.
Sure, I've got to be in a meeting in about 10 minutes, but let's see where we get up to, and we can make some more time if we need to.
Okay. I've got a problem. I'm a bit overwhelmed at work at the moment. There are a couple of additional projects that I've taken on, and I also have my daily job that I have to do. And on top of it, my Outlook stopped working yesterday. So I came to the office today with a huge task list. So I just don't know where to start.
Okay, it sounds that there's several layers there, and it sounds a little bit frustrating.
Yes.
So, if it was working well, what would be happening for you?
I guess if it was working well, I'd be on top of all things, and my inbox would be zero.
Yep.
And yeah, I wouldn't be this overwhelmed.
Okay. And again, with all of that happening, what would other people be noticing about you?
Other people would probably be noticing that I'm getting back to them on time. They probably don't have to wait this long.
Yep.
The way it used to be is how it would be now.
Yep.
Yeah. They probably are not aware of the additional projects that I've taken on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, is there a time in the past where you've been able to manage these multiple priorities?
Yes, there has been, yeah.
Okay.
There have been a couple of times when I had additional projects like this, and I did get through them, yeah.
Okay, and what do you think worked for you then that might be able to work here?
Maybe I should write everything down. I think that's probably a good place to start.
Yeah.
I think at the moment it's all there in my head, and that's why it's all a bit confusing.
Okay, so making a bit of a list.
Yes, making a bit of list, yeah.
And what else?
And also maybe letting the others know that I have these additional projects and they probably have to wait a bit longer than they used to. I think at the moment they don't know, and because they don't know, they probably have the same expectation level, and I'm probably getting nervous because I'm not able to deliver it in the same time frame.
Okay, so making the list, letting people know.
Yes.
What else might be useful to you?
And just go through the list one step at a time and not think of the complete list, but just the task in hand.
Okay, great. And what difference will that make?
I think that way I'll just be able to complete the list and not get this overwhelmed. I think because I'm overwhelmed, I'm not able to get through the list.
Fantastic. So if we were going to check in on this maybe tomorrow,
Yes.
what would you like to be telling me?
That I've got a list with 10, 15 items and I'm halfway through the list. Jason, and thank you.
Great. Sounds like you've got some ways forward.
Yes.
If we need to check in again, I'm happy to check in
thank
tomorrow
you.
when we've got a bit more time.
Yeah.
That'd be fantastic. Happy to do that.
Oh, thanks so much. I feel better already. Thanks.
Sandy, thanks.
Thank you.
There's, in a short clip, 3 or 4 minutes, I think 3 minutes and 30 seconds or something there. We would have seen a number of things, I think, that would be what we've been exploring over these last few minutes. That just to comment on those, a bit of check-in in terms of reflecting and demonstrating some empathy for Sandy's challenge, but very quickly a shift towards a refocus from the problem towards what's wanted instead. And so in a short conversation that happens fairly quickly. An exploration of sources and what was already or what had been working in past situations where Sandy might have encountered this challenge. There's also a nice level of transparency around the time boundaries there. That, yep, 7 minutes, got to be in another meeting, but let's talk about it. If we need more time, then we can plan that. So a number of those things all need to be acknowledged in a short interaction. There was an exploration of some options. Some of these things you'll recognize from the growth model. that we introduced earlier, and then some specific next step actions that part of what Sandy could take away from that. So all of that, just in over 3 minutes, is a way in which we think the coaching approach interactions can make a difference in those just a minute conversations.
Yeah, thank you, John. One of the what's really interesting for us when we work in schools is how this situation happens frequently. When we're delivering coach training or we're working with schools talking about coaching, school leaders often say, look, there's people are coming into my office all of the time. And we believe that small adaptations to the kind of conversations we're having, from one which kind of dwells on the problem, one which the leader ends up having to come up with solutions. Because by doing that, actually, one of the things that's happening is we're creating a dependency culture where people are coming to the leader looking for answers. So one of the transformational things that a coaching approach such as this can bring is a change in the type of conversation, so that the person coming in leaves with ideas, with energy towards the kinds of things that they'd like to do. And whereas sometimes when I work in schools, educational leaders say, Christian, we're not going to have time for these kinds of conversations. Actually, in the long run, this creates more time, and it allows the leader to have that kind of presence and be accessible to people, so that when they do come in, like this conversation, they leave energized and with some ideas about what to do. Anyway, I hope you all had a chance to hear that video, that you got the audio okay. If not, we'll make sure the video is available afterwards for you to listen to. As John said, it's only 3.5 minutes or so. What we'd love now, though, is to hear some of the questions that may have come up and see if we're able to respond to some of those.
Terrific. I have some questions for you. The first question, what advice would you give to engage teachers who fear growth and change?
Oh, wow. What a great question. So what advice would we give about interacting with teachers who fear growth and change? I think this comes back actually to what we were saying about the model and what we talked about, the importance of relationships. So I would say that the first stage is to build positive relationships with as many people as possible, particularly teachers, to try and find out what it is that they're looking for initially. I think it's really also about thinking about the culture of the school and finding ways that we might engage teachers more. And definitely one of the things we've found is that giving responsibility over to educators about their own professional development and growth, that makes a huge difference. So one of the things that coaching can bring is a kind of a division between evaluation and talking about professional learning and growth. And I think if we're able to split those things in certain conversations, it's likely to reduce levels of fear or anxiety.
Yes, just to add that I think the focus on helping educators become authors of their own growth and development is the way that we try and position the coaching work that we do, so that we do respect their experience, their knowledge, their expertise, and the coaching interactions that we're encouraging are really about unlocking that potential, unlocking that experience, and helping them become the drivers of their own growth and change. So Christian will use the concept of democratic voluntary involvement as a principle that governs a lot of our work. So we do try and encourage the coaching initiatives that we're involved in schools to operate under that principle, So there's a way in which people engage in this and volunteer and join in. And we've found when they've seen the benefits, they become advocates for others who may have been a little more reticent or unsure initially. That's the way we've seen it really start to move across the school in a broader way.
And if I can just add to that as well, because this is a really interesting question. One of the things I enjoy doing most is actually coaching educators and educational leaders myself. And when there is a little bit of reluctance initially, or the teacher isn't able to see a clear goal for themselves, one of the most powerful things that I do is reconnect to that person's motivation. And the kinds of questions I ask are about reconnecting to what made them want to be a teacher in the first place, and what is it that they're really trying to achieve. What is it that they can contribute, and that kind of reconnecting to the passion that every educator has, that every educator brought into schools, colleges, and universities. That can be a powerful starting point for conversations where we allow the educator themselves to think about what's needed for them to be the best educator that they can be, so that the learners can be the best learners that the learners can be.
Thank you. I have another question for you. In the growth model video that you showed, the coachees seem to come in with some options already. How do you approach coachees who cannot articulate options and tactics?
Yeah, now that's another great question. So one of the aspects, Jeff, of a coaching way of being, one of the things I think is patience. And in practical terms, when you watch an effective coach, they're comfortable with silences. So remember, one of the other things I said about a coaching way of being is that belief in the coachee. So it's really for the coach or the person using a coaching approach to come into these conversations believing that the person who's stuck with something or looking to achieve something, that they do have the answers themselves. So of course, if they come to you stuck with something, the initial reaction might be, I don't know what to do, that's why I'm here. But with coaxing, with creating the right environment, with asking questions about, so have you encountered something like this before? So connecting back to situations where they may have overcome similar things. I might ask questions such as, what do other educators around you, what have you seen other people do? I would try and get them to be more creative. So sometimes we would use activities, either practical activities or pen and paper activities. So I guess the answer to this is to be patient, to allow them to think in the kind of the environment you've created, and really encourage them to come up with their own ideas.
Yeah, just because I think, to add a comment here, that when people have generated their own insights around different ways of responding to the challenge they might be encountering or the opportunity that they might be encountering, we found that there's much more energy, much more commitment to the ideas that emerge. And so that's why we think the finely tuned way that we ask questions, the way that we listen, the way that we really help this person have, in some ways, a more effective conversation with themselves, is the source of surprising number of aha moments and insights that can emerge. And that's kind of the magic of coaching. We see when that happens. Sure, there is a place where it might be appropriate for the coach to be in a way that stimulates some more specific options. But we do think a default position is best invested in really working to allow the coachee to self-discover.
And this also comes back to what we're talking about in our book here, about leaders adopting a coaching approach. And adopting a coaching approach means that when somebody comes into your office to talk to you, or catches you in the corridor or on the playground, that you would tend to pass the responsibility over to that person to come up with a solution. And because I've coached so many people in schools, I've heard educators say, oh, I know if I go to my leader, they're going to expect me to come with solutions. So it's almost like if leaders adopt a coaching approach, those coming to those leaders are prepared. So when you've said that in that video clip, we're seeing that Sandy has come with some of her own ideas, if the leader is normally takes a coaching approach, it actually encourages the person coming into the office to come with some ideas already. But conversely, and to be a bit challenging, if the leader is always providing answers or solutions, then it actually, what happens is the person coming to the office doesn't come prepared, because their expectation is that the leader will give them the answer. So if educational leaders are encountering that frequently, I think there's, both parties may have some responsibility towards it. One, we want the educators coming to speak to the leader to take some more responsibility, to come with some ideas about how they might overcome whatever obstacle they're facing, or how they can achieve whatever they want to achieve, but also for the leader to adopt what we're calling a coaching approach here as well. Jeff, do you have any more questions? There's a few things I just wanted to say, but I'm happy to take a couple more questions if you want, like.
No, we're all set. I can turn it over to you to say whatever you'd like.
Oh, lovely. Thank you very much for that. One of the things I just wanted to say is I want to make sure that when we're talking to educators, that we're acknowledging that a lot of what we're talking about is already happening in schools, and not just recently either. For many generations, the best educators, the best educational leaders have been using what we're now talking about as a coaching approach. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners today, a lot of the attendees, if they think back to educators who really inspired them, maybe to become teachers themselves or to become educational leaders, if you think back to those teachers who really made a positive impact on you, then this is what we're talking about. I'm sure that they will have had the coaching way of being that we've referred to. And I'm sure that in their one-to-one interactions with you, but also with the class, they will have been using what we're calling a coaching approach. So I just wanted to acknowledge that these kinds of things have been going on. And it's our intention, John and I, to try to support as many schools as possible, to have as many educators and educational leaders as possible who adopt this coaching approach, as we call it. And so one of the last slide I'd like to look at is the one that says ACE on it. One way to really be able to know whether a coaching intervention has worked or not, whether we're talking about formal coaching or a coaching approach, is that the coachee leaves with clear actions. So as a result of a coaching approach or a formal coaching interaction, the coachee should leave knowing what they're going to do as a result of the conversation. The other thing that we'd want is that the coachee or the person we're talking to, things are clearer for them as a result of having had that conversation. So they leave with more clarity. And really importantly for us, that last one, E for energy, is that, when people are stuck or facing challenges or, really striving to be the best they can be, what's needed is energy. And what we've realized through the work that we do is that both formal coaching and a coaching approach, those kinds of conversations tend to increase energy. And that's what's needed for us to be able to do the valuable work that we do.
Yeah, I guess for me, in summary, it would be, I find the sort of short 3 questions helpful takeaways here, that when we're involved in these coaching approach conversations particularly, we are looking to see these actions, clarity, energy emerge. But it's been by focusing on what's wanted, what is this person wanting to move towards, what's working, what's already working for them that we might be able to draw on and build a sense of resourcefulness, and what's next. Is maybe a shorthand way to think about this. What's wanted, what's working, what's next is a helpful way, I find, to just kind of think about what might be going on. And if I can do that and do those sorts of things, as I think we saw Jason do in that clip, then we'll get some actions, we'll get some clarity, and we'll get some energy. And so I hope you found what we've explored today interesting and useful. It's been delightful for us. It's early morning here and where we are at the moment, but it's been good to talk with you. And there is a list of some references that we've just referred to through the course of the presentation. We'll make available an edited version of this PowerPoint deck so that you can track some of those things down if you like. And of course, these things are in the book as well. So thanks very much for your support, and great to be with you.
Yeah, and I'll just add a thanks from me as well. I really hope that you found this session useful. Thank you very much. It's a great privilege to work in the education sector.
Great. Thank you so much, John and Christian. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We wanted to let you know that you can learn more about the Growth Coaching Conversation Framework in the new book by John Campbell and Christian van Nieuwerburgh. It's called The Leader's Guide to Coaching in Schools, and it includes the video that you saw during this presentation, plus several other sample videos, plus sample questions and more details and strategies around the Growth Coaching Framework. As a thank you for attendees of this webinar, we are offering a 20% off promo code that you can see on the screen there. We will also share the promo code via email after this webinar. This promo code is valid through the end of the month, and you can order at Corwin.com for U.S. orders. For international orders, the book is available in the UK and in Australia. You can order it at sagepub.co.uk if you are based in the UK or Europe, or you can order through Footprint in Australia and New Zealand at www.footprint.com.au. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, and please join us next week for John Saphir's webinar on classroom discourse that makes student thinking visible. This webinar will focus on instructional strategies that create rigorous classroom dialogue. So you can sign up for free at www.corwin.com/webinars. Once again, thank you for joining today's webinar, and thank you to John Campbell and Christian van Nieuwerburgh. And we wish you a good day and have a good evening wherever you are.